Hey there guys, welcome back to another landscape photography video here in the beautiful Colorado Rocky Mountains. Today I'm actually out location scouting a spot to possibly come back and shoot in the autumn, like September, October, when the leaves start to change. You get all those delicious yellows and golds that they get up here in the mountains in the autumn. In this video I'm going to be sharing some of my top tips for improving as a landscape photographer and improving your landscape photography overall in general. Now these are tips that I've kind of learned over the past 3 years or so of doing landscape photography. So I kind of found that these are the things that to me really stick out as like things that really helped to keep in mind when trying to improve your landscape photography. Let's just dive right into them. Starting with tip number 1 to improve your landscape photography. And I can't really stress this point enough, and I feel like it's a bit obvious if I'm completely honest with you. And I think that it may be one of the most important things that I could share here, is that you just need to get out and shoot and, you know, learn about it as much as you can. Just get comfortable with getting out and taking photos. And that really comes along with just enjoying going out in nature and shooting. When I started to really improve was when I just started getting out more. Before, when I first kind of started like dabbling with landscape photography, you know, maybe I got and shot like once a month or less than that in a lot of cases. And of course, back then I wasn't improving at nearly as high of a level as I did later on when I started getting out and shooting. You know, at least once a week, I would say, is probably a good amount. I at least try to get at least once a week. Generally, these days, I try to get out 2 to 3 times a week to shoot. For me, I'd say it was probably about 1.5 years ago, getting close to 2 years ago, when I started getting out and shooting regularly and just trying to find new locations and go to different places and just take my camera out and just use it and just take photos. And you can't really be too like picky about what you shoot either. It's just like, just take photos of things that look interesting to you. You know, anything that catches your eye, just try and take a photo of it and try and see if you can find an interesting composition or an interesting way to, you know, show that subject, whatever you think it looks interesting. I think that's incredibly important. Not if you're just starting out as a landscape photographer, but in general, like even with me shooting now, I just try and look for things that catch my eye and shoot subjects that catch my eye in nature. Really, to me, landscape photography is kind of like taking portraits of nature. So I generally try to find subjects that are interesting and take photos of them. So yeah, if you're just starting out, I would recommend just get out and shoot and just take photos of whatever, you know, interests you, whatever catches your eye. Just try and take some photos of it. Now with step 1 out of the way, I think the most important thing you have to do is if you want to improve your photography, you have to get out and take photos. Moving on to step 2, if you're just getting into landscape photography and you have a camera, or you're looking to get a camera, I mean, you're not familiar with the camera that you have yet, you just need to get out again, just get out and shoot and use your camera, because you really have to get familiar with the camera you're using, the settings, how it's going to react in different situations, different lighting conditions. Like, it's so important to understand how your camera works. And one thing I've noticed with myself is the longer I've used this camera that I've been using now for almost the past 2 years, this Lumix G85, the longer I've used this camera, the longer I've shot with it, the better photos I've gotten. Partially because, yes, I've improved as a photographer over those years, but also because I've become more and more familiar with the camera and its limitations. And in order to take good photos, you have to understand your camera's limitations and what it's capable of doing in any given situation. If you get to a certain place and the conditions are a certain way, it's like you have to have an understanding of how that camera is going to react and what kind of results it's going to give you in those certain conditions in that situation. This is part of why I think it's so essential for you, if you really want to learn landscape photography and actually get better at it, is to learn how to shoot your camera in full manual mode. Now, I'm not saying that you have to shoot in full manual all the time, because you don't. I always do. I pretty much only shoot in full manual because I like shooting that way. So I just recommend put your camera in manual settings, go out and shoot with it, and just experiment with how it's going to react based on how you change the aperture versus the ISO versus the shutter speed. It's really important to have an understanding of how your camera is going to react in whatever, you know, given circumstance that you are in. Whatever the conditions are, you have to understand how your camera is going to react in those situations. Now on to tip number 3 that I find has helped with my landscape photography, and that is not making it all about the gear. I think that as photographers, it's really easy when maybe you get results that you're not fully happy with, especially when you're learning, is that it's easy to just say, you know, my camera's not good enough, my gear isn't good enough, all of this stuff, whatever. And in some cases, yes, if like I don't know, you're using a 5-year-old smartphone, that's probably not really good enough. But in most cases, any like decent mirrorless or DSLR camera is going to do you just fine. Like, you're going to be able to get good photos with any camera made within the last like several years, to be honest with you. So it's easy to just try and make it all about the gear and be like, oh well, if I buy this camera, then I'm going to become a way better photographer. It's like, you probably won't become a way better photographer, to be honest with you. Like, it could help you in improving in the future if you continue to use that camera and learn how it functions and how it reacts in certain situations. But just getting a new camera on its own isn't going to make you a better photographer. You're going to become a better photographer by getting out and shooting and using your gear and becoming familiar with how all of it works together. Now, I feel like I can give you a perfect example for myself of why I don't think that gear is really all that important, as long as you have at least a camera that costs at least maybe a few $100s. Because the camera I've been using for almost 2 years now, this Lumix G85, is only a $700 kit. Body with a lens. It came with a 12 to 60 millimeter lens. It's a micro four thirds mirrorless camera, and I found that I have definitely hit the limitations of what this camera can do, but I think that's very essential in becoming a good photographer, is understanding your camera's limitations. But to be honest with you, there are very few situations where I felt like I needed a better camera than this. In most situations, the camera does just fine. $700 kit does me just fine. I don't really need anything else. There are situations where maybe if I had better gear, the photos would turn out a little bit better, but in most situations, I don't really think it's necessary. As long as you have a camera that you like using, that is adequate for the type of shooting that you're doing, and you just like taking out and using it, then I think you're fine. You don't really need to worry about gear all that much. So my fourth tip for improving your landscape photography is to just try and think more about what you're shooting. Think more about like the subject and the composition and how you're presenting like what you're shooting to whoever is viewing your image. Because I think the biggest thing that I've realized about photography, and how people always try and say to me, like, just say someone's in this beautiful landscape and they take out their, you know, their smartphone here, they pull up their camera and they just point their phone, you know, and they take a photo of a landscape, right? And they think it's like such a beautiful landscape, and they're like, oh, it's so gorgeous in person, it's going to be great on the phone, on your camera, and then of course, like, it looks terrible. People always say, you know, camera just never does it justice. The photos never do it justice. It's like, it's not really that the camera doesn't do it any justice. It's a fact that you don't understand how the camera perceives the world compared to how the human eye perceives the world. So you can't think about photography, taking a photo, photographing a subject, you know, as the same way you would look at it with your eye, because the human eye is so far more sophisticated than any camera is. You know, the human eye can see so much of a higher of a dynamic range than a camera will, and a camera just isn't capable of doing that. So you have to be so aware of lighting. Really, I mean, lighting is huge in photography. Like, if you just have completely blown out skies, you know, and the sun's just blasting straight at you, it's like, no, it's not probably going to work, because the camera just can't discern that high of a dynamic range. I really think that this tip, like with a lot of these other ones I'm giving, is that you're not going to be able to learn these in like one day. These are things that you have to apply over a long period of time to your photography, and over time it's going to pay dividends. Like, you're going to improve if you apply this advice to your photography over a 6-month period. Like, you're going to see improvements in your photography. So really, again, with this tip, is you just have to understand that the camera does not perceive the world or a scene in the same way that your eye does. And as soon as you try to see the world in the way a camera would, or understand what a scene is going to look like through your camera, I think the sooner you're going to be able to start getting better photographs. It's not going to make you an incredible photographer overnight, but over the long haul, months and years of, you know, putting this into practice, you're going to start to understand what I'm talking about. That you'll start to see things, you know, almost in photography. Like, you'll start seeing the world as if you were looking at it through a camera, and that's kind of how, like, you end up finding subjects in good photo spots, is by you start to understand how the camera perceives the world and not just how the human eye does. For tip number 5, the final piece of advice I'm going to give in this video, that is visiting places that you just like going to. You know, go to places that you want to photograph. I mean, this seems kind of like obvious, but you know, go to places where you'd be happy going there if you didn't bring your camera at all. I think this kind of just comes back to just enjoying doing landscape photography in general, and how it's really important that you just enjoy being out in nature and enjoy being kind of out in the great outdoors. Because if you don't, you know, enjoy being in the places you're going, then you're probably not going to enjoy photographing them either. So, I mean, pretty simple, I think almost obvious point to make, or piece of advice to provide, but I think it's very important to go to a place you want to be at and you enjoy being there. Whether you get a good photo or not, you're going to enjoy the experience of visiting that place and just seeing it. For example, for myself, I basically ended up moving out here to Colorado, living out here for a good portion of the year. A big reason is because of the landscape photography opportunities. Like, it's such a big part of what I do that it's really important for me that I live in a place where I can get out any day I want and go photograph really nice, beautiful landscapes like I can here. And maybe it's not going to be that extreme for you, like you're going to literally pack up and move your entire life to a new location just for photography. But for me, it's a big reason why I spend, you know, a lot of time here, is because the landscapes are amazing, they're beautiful, and I love being out here in nature, whether I'm taking photos or have my camera with me or not. But obviously now, since I am a photographer, I make these YouTube videos, it's a big part of my life and why I'm living out here. So I think just visiting places that you like being and you enjoy being out in nature and photographing the places you love to be in is really very, very important. Anyways, those are my 5 tips and advice for improving as a landscape photographer and improving your landscape photos. If you do enjoy my content, then feel free to subscribe below. Like I said earlier, I will be having tons of more content coming out in the future, whether it be tips or advice about landscape photography or me just sharing my adventures in the places that I'm photographing, which I like to do a lot of time as well. Instagram is at envision_adventure. Also check out my website, my photography website and blog. That is envisionadventure.net. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next landscape photography video.